Have you ever noticed how the moment you start tracking something, it starts to change? Whether it's steps on a fitness tracker or likes on a social media post, the act of measuring seems to magically influence our behavior. This isn't magic, it's a fundamental principle of how systems, both human and automated, actually work. Today, we're diving deep into why metrics, which are designed to be neutral observers, almost always turn into powerful incentives, often without anyone intending for it to happen. Metrics are supposed to be simple. They're tools to help us understand reality. In a company, metrics might track performance or efficiency. On a digital platform, they monitor user engagement or growth. In theory, they're just information. They recreated to reduce uncertainty in complex systems that generate way more data than any person can process. Metrics compress all that complexity into manageable signals, helping us see patterns and make informed decisions. They are meant to support our judgment, not replace it. But here's the twist. In practice, metrics rarely stay neutral for long. The moment a metric becomes visible, it starts to change the game. Visibility attracts attention. What gets displayed, tracked, and discussed becomes important, while everything else fades into the background. Think about it. Even without a prize attached, people naturally start to adjust their behavior to improve the numbers that everyone can see. It taps into our desire for a good reputation or a sense of competence. A metric doesn't need a reward to matter. Simply being seen is often enough. The real transformation happens when measurement is used for evaluation. Once a metric is tied to success or failure, whether it's a performance review, a promotion, or even just unspoken approval, behavior begins to adapt almost instantly. People are smart. They learn which numbers matter and which don't. All their effort starts flowing toward what's being evaluated. This isn't about being manipulative. It's completely rational. We all optimize for the signals that affect our outcomes. At this point, the metric is no longer a passive observer. It has become a full-blown incentive. Interestingly, metrics start shaping our attention long before they shape our actions. They define what we even consider worth noticing. They guide the questions we ask and determine which problems feel urgent. Over time, we begin to see the entire system through the lens of its metrics. Reality gets interpreted purely in terms of numbers, and anything that can't be easily measured becomes harder to justify or defend. So, by the time a formal reward is attached to a metric, our behavior may have already shifted to align with it. This leads to a classic problem. We start optimizing for the proxy instead of the reality. A customer satisfaction score is a proxy for a great customer experience. A website's bounce rate is a proxy for user engagement. These proxies are necessary simplifications, but they are always imperfect. When a metric becomes the main goal, people naturally focus on improving the number itself, because that's more visible and reliable than improving the complex reality it's supposed to represent. As this optimization continues, the gap between the metric and reality can widen. The system looks like it's improving on paper, but the actual real-world outcomes might be stagnating or even getting worse. This also leads to what we can call the compression of judgment. Metrics make decision-making seem simpler by reducing complex situations to comparable numbers. This can feel efficient. Decisions are faster. Disagreements are easier to resolve. But over time, the system loses its ability to reason about anything that falls outside its narrow metric framework. Nuance is lost. Important trade-offs are ignored, and long-term consequences are discounted. Judgment gets replaced by pure optimization. Furthermore, metrics encourage what's known as local optimization. Individuals and teams focus on improving the numbers they are directly responsible for. They refine their strategies to move their specific metric in the right direction. And individually, these efforts make perfect sense. But collectively, they can lead to system-wide distortion. When different parts of a system are all optimizing for different metrics, coordination breaks down. Even if everyone is optimizing for the same metric, the entire system can drift away from its original purpose, because a single number can rarely capture the full complexity of a healthy, functioning system. Once metrics start influencing behavior, a powerful feedback loop is created. Behavior adapts to the metric. The metric, in turn, reflects that adapted behavior. And the designers of the system look at the improving metric and interpret it as a sign of success. This reinforces their confidence in the metric, even as it becomes less and less representative of the real world. Over time, the system becomes incredibly good at performing well according to its own measurements, regardless of whether those measurements still correspond to any real value. This is how metrics quietly and fundamentally reshape our organizations and platforms. In the digital world, automation accelerates this entire process. With real-time dashboards and instant performance comparisons, the feedback loops become incredibly tight. Behavior adjusts almost immediately. There's no delay between an action and its measurement. When feedback is constant, metrics start to dominate our perception. Decisions become purely reactive. We end up chasing the latest blip on the chart rather than focusing on stable, long-term patterns. The faster the feedback, the stronger the metrics' influence. Now, you might think the obvious solution is just to add more metrics. If one metric is causing distortion, maybe another one can balance it out. But in practice, this rarely solves the problem. It just increases complexity. People still have to figure out which metrics matter most and prioritize accordingly. The system becomes harder to understand, but the underlying behavior of adapting to incentives remains. More measurement doesn't automatically lead to better understanding. Metrics also have a built-in bias toward the short term. It's much easier to measure and track weekly or monthly performance than it is to measure long-term outcomes like brand trust or sustainable growth. As a result, metrics push systems toward short-term optimization. Actions that give you an immediate numbers boost are favored over those that build long-term capacity. And this isn't a moral failing, it's a structural bias. When metrics become incentives, short-term thinking becomes embedded in the very fabric of daily decision-making. Part of what makes metrics so powerful is their illusion of objectivity. Numbers feel neutral, authoritative. They create the impression that decisions are data-driven and rational, rather than subjective. This perceived objectivity makes people less likely to question them, even when they have a gut feeling that something is wrong. Over time, metrics become a substitute for critical judgment, rather than a helpful input into it. And this doesn't just change behavior, it changes culture. Metrics define what gets praised, what's discussed, and what's remembered. Success stories are framed around hitting targets. Failure is explained by missed numbers. Slowly but surely, a company's values start to align with its metrics, not its stated principles. Culture follows measurement. So, what can we do? The key is to treat metrics as tools for learning, not as targets for evaluation. This requires careful design and a lot of restraint. We can separate measurement from reward. We can build processes that allow qualitative judgment to override the numbers. We can rotate or revisit our metrics regularly to prevent them from becoming stale. One of the most powerful things we can do is to simply slow down the measurement. Less frequent evaluation encourages us to look for real patterns instead of just reacting to noise. It creates space for interpretation and judgment. Ultimately, we have to accept that metrics will always be imperfect. Trying to eliminate all distortion is unrealistic. Instead, we should design systems that can tolerate a bit of imperfection, that allow for ambiguity and discretion, and that resist the urge to optimize everything. Metrics should support our thinking, not replace it. So, to wrap it all up, metrics start as simple tools for understanding, but their visibility and use in evaluation quietly transform them into powerful incentives. They shape our attention, guide our decisions, and can distort outcomes, often without any bad intentions. Recognizing this simple fact is the first step. It shifts our focus from just what we measure to how we use that measurement. Because in the end, systems don't just respond to what is measured, they respond to what measurement makes matter. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more videos on systems thinking and design. See you in the next one.